Welcome to Prime Time for Women's Cultivating Courage, Courageous Living with Jen Silbert. Jen is the founder of Raw Naked Living. She is a life coach, a fitness and health nutrition expert, and she joins us today to talk about the courage we need to move forward in her life. Jen last week spoke about identifying what fears hold us back, and today she's going to be talking about taking action based on that conversation, right?
Well, taking action, and then also just being still. That's the thrust of what we'll talk about today, because that isn't something you normally associate with being courageous, but I want to make the case for why that's a courageous act in and of itself. And I'm excited about even any interactive conversation, because I think, Barb, you'll probably be able to attest to the value of the importance of being still and how courageous we'll see that really is. There's a lot of scary things in the stillness.
Yeah, and I think sometimes the idea if we keep just doing, then we're outrunning our fear. And what you're saying is take the time to be still, say hello to that, and then have that lead you, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we'll explore that void today a little bit more, again, because it isn't what you associate with being courageous, but the process of cultivating courage happens in the stillness. And so we need to make time for the stillness. And it might end up sounding like something we already know, but yet we don't do. So why aren't we doing it? So we're going to explore the fears that lurk in the void, in that space of stillness that I think we are subconsciously avoiding because we don't want to come face to face with them.
And Jen, just for people who haven't heard your story before, maybe you could talk a little bit about the stillness you were forced into because of your illness and how that led you to a place of courage.
Thank you. I don't know if I tell that story too much, but I guess it's so.
You can give us the short version just in case somebody hasn't heard.
Of course.
It's so powerful.
And I think that we probably all have varying degrees of moments that force us to step back and re-examine who we are, what we're doing, what we stand for, if this is a path. And sometimes that event is not big enough or powerful enough for us to take seriously or maybe take action. It might cause us to pause for a while. But we are people of action. We are women of action. We want to have purpose. And when we sit still, I think we find that we are going to lose momentum and we're not going to be able to regain that momentum. It could be, I'm looking at Barb and I'm thinking of an example of how, when we're fit and we're healthy and we're on a regimen to lose that weight and get more fit and trim, everything is going good until all of a sudden we sprain a muscle.
Oh, you can talk to me about injuries. I've been there multiple times.
And now all of a sudden, what happens?
We have to learn to be still. We have to take our time off of whatever we're doing. We have to reevaluate where we are. And sometimes we have to start back from not the beginning, perhaps, but we have to reassess and start lower than where we were. And that's hard for us too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because you feel like first off, you're going to lose all that momentum. You're like, oh, I have worked so hard to get where I'm at that I'm afraid that if I stop for too long, I'll lose momentum. And then I'm not going to be regaining that. So there's an element of uncertainty in that void. So you kind of want to fight the obvious and you want to push ahead to say, no, I got to keep going. So because you're on autopilot. You got that momentum. And probably a number of other fears. Maybe you might be afraid that it's not going to heal fast enough and you're not going to come back. And now you're going to be left behind.
The other thing is, Jen, is that when you have an injury, there is physical pain with it. And I think we're often we just want that to go away. We're not really, maybe I shouldn't say we, I
Speak for yourself, right? I don't mind suffering, right?
Yeah. And I sometimes, I had a really bad hamstring pull last August. And it wasn't until like January or maybe early February. And when I first hurt myself, I started saying, well, what's going to be over sooner, COVID or my injury? And I assumed it would be COVID. And as COVID went on, I'm like, darn, I might actually be better before this pandemic's over. And that was a different kind of reframing my injury, and also kind of putting in perspective that there's something worse than my injury. I mean, this pandemic has been hard on so many people, and I kind of helped me to have a little perspective. Like, this injury, it was literally a pain in my butt, but it was not anywhere near what other people were dealing with.
Well, you do bring up a good point. Number one, the pandemic is an excellent example of a force that caused us to stop. This interesting, because this feeds into, I see this thread being woven into many of our conversations about how we respond to change that happens around us, that we didn't want, we didn't ask for, but it just happens. So where do we find the strength to respond, to move forward? Because it's easy to be pushed back and to stop and be at that standstill. Or, as we're talking about in this conversation, to push and resist in a space where we should intentionally step back and see it as a divine appointment to take a pause and look at whatever lesson there is to be had in that moment. But you raise a very good point, because that point about reframing your circumstances is critical at times like this. And it played a role when I had my cancer diagnosis. And cancer, of course, is that really big pow. You know, that's one of life's big ones. And we have a lot of, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of smaller setbacks that sometimes we may resist and push against because they're not big enough yet to force a major pause. But then you have the big ones, like the divorce, like the health issue like mine, death in the family, being laid off, completely taken by surprise. And now what? Now what? The temptation is that we want to kind of pick up the pieces and just keep moving ahead. But what I want to talk about and explore a little bit here, and I know that you both probably fully understand this, but I think it's just creating some sacred space today, and for those that are watching, to give us permission to say it's okay. It's okay to stop for a while. And let me start by sharing quickly a little bit of my history and the role of my mother in this, okay? Okay, so I have been a busy girl since I was a little girl. I've always been in motion. I've been highly energetic, surprise.
Right.
High vibe. And I just always like to be engaged in some activity. So I love being stimulated. I would always jump into any adventure. I love intellectual stimulation. I love engaging with people, especially if they have a purpose and a mission, because it's like forward motion, right? But when I was a teen and a young adult, my mother was starting to send me notes and drop these hints that started to become annoying, that I needed to start slowing down. And there was a time that she gave me, must have been a cassette tape at the time, but if you remember the Simon and Garfunkel song, Feeling Groovy, you guys remember that? Slow down, you move too fast, gotta make the morning last, just kicking down the cobblestones, looking for fun and feeling groovy. Yeah. Feeling groovy. Yeah, I know. I figured that was a good song to share because it probably, you know, we probably all know that one in our prime time. But I resented her attempts to slow me down at that time because it felt like she was inhibiting my growth. And as time went on, because of the fact that my mom was a full-time housewife, and I now was a young adult who was out in the world, and I had a job that had me traveling. I was working with high-level executives, and I just had an energy of motion that when I would come home to visit, I was okay with sitting down and talking for a little while, but my mom would like to sit for hours and talk. Whereas I'm like, okay, I got people to see, I got things to do. I want to go run, I want to go exercise. And that actually created a growing tension between us. And my visits started to become shorter and shorter because I kind of resented the fact that she was always nagging me to slow down. So that aside, fast forward today, and it's kind of crazy that the role of just being is huge in my life today. But
So never say never.
Never say never. Right. But the space in between then and now was filled with a lot of dragons. I don't want to call them skeletons because we have skeletons in our closet. I'm going to call these dragons. These were dragons that I wasn't ready to face, that were lurking in that void of quiet. And I had this profound experience a couple years ago when I had my first reflexology appointment. Everyone familiar with reflexology? Love it. Hi, Trish. Welcome. Reflexology, oh my goodness, I'm hooked now. I just love that because my husband gives me foot rubs, but that is nothing compared to a good reflexology appointment. Yeah, Barb's nodding her head.
I fell asleep once. I normally don't fall asleep and things like that. I fell asleep once during a reflexology.
I know, I catch myself snoring. I'll be like this and also, oh God, I'm too embarrassed. I fall asleep and be heard snoring. But my reflexologist was working on my pressure points on my feet, and all of a sudden I started to cry. And I didn't feel sad per se, but there was this water just pouring out of my eyes and dripping down my cheeks. And I was like, what is going on here? What is going on? And I discovered that she had hit a release button that was allowing my body to release these pent-up emotions that had been building up for a long time, that in the space of not pausing and making space for quiet to process them, they were flooding out of my eyes. And that was another profound, like a physical experience to demonstrate to me the power of suppressed emotions. And that's really what we're getting at, is the need to create moments of stillness and to be okay just being and not doing, so that your body physically can process all of the emotions it's enduring that you end up kind of like mowing over by just continuing to stay busy. So, that's kind of how I want to just introduce this from maybe an experiential standpoint.
And maybe, Jen, if it's okay, we can see if anybody else wants to weigh in on something that they've gotten in touch with, a feeling that sort of like your story of your mom, what was holding you back or something like that. Barb or Trish, I don't know if you want to weigh in.
I could probably just talk about grief I had when my brother died. He had committed suicide. It's a big, long story, which I won't get into right now, but I stayed really busy for 2 months. Like, I was the solid one. I stayed busy. I kept working. I was going to school. Just for 2 months, did nothing. And then all of a sudden, one day, like about 2 months later, I started being haunted at night, not sleeping. And so, I guess that's what happened, is these things were pent up. I seemed to be okay for 2 months, and then boom, all of a sudden I'm haunted. I'm not sleeping.
Wow.
So I had to seek medical care. I needed to sleep. So, nobody likes to take medicine, but I had to take some medication to help me relax and sleep. I had to go to a grief counselor, and I thought, oh, I have friends. I could talk to them, my friends about this. I don't need a grief counselor. So I had to go to a grief counselor for 2 months. So it was just odd that for 2 months, I just stayed busy doing everything I was doing because I was in a doctoral program. I was working full-time at hospice. So for 2 months, it held me, but then it just hit me.
Yeah, I think we all have our, you're such a strong person like Jen that I think sometimes our default busyness can mask it, but it's not all of us have our breaking points. And I thank you for sharing that, because I think it's when we share our stories that other women are going to be more likely to follow Jen's advice and be still. So thank you, Barb.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Barb.
Trish, I was going to check in with you if you wanted to share anything. Okay, Jen.
You could just unmute herself, but
Yeah.
here we go. Hi,
Sorry.
Trish.
Yeah, no. I'm sorry. Yeah, I had to do something to come back. I probably can think about when my mom died. It was a long time ago, about 25 years ago, but I was the executor, also kind of like my stepfather wasn't well, and my whole family was leaning on me. And so I did the same thing. I ran around. I was busy, you know, taking care of the will and everything. And when I finally sort of got to the end, I didn't need medication, but I could say I was depressed until I worked it through. And, you know, I realized after that the being busy part wasn't really a good idea. I should have mourned.
Very good.
Stood on myself, but my mourning process did not take place until I quietened down.
Right, right. Well, thank you for sharing that, Trish.
So when we hear the word courage, we often think about action, right? We think about brave action, like taking charge action, like, all right, I'm going to quit that job. I'm going to confront that bully. I'm going to leave that marriage. I'm going to get up and speak in front of people and confront my fear of public speaking. I'm going to grab a sword and slay the dragons. I'm going to lead the troops into battle, all those big, brave actions. But the case we made here is that courage can be so much quieter. And I've not really appreciated that until really the past few years, when we had these examples where I saw the side effects of avoiding the stillness. And then it wasn't just a cancer, but it was my marriage coming to a halt. My father had just died. My husband and I, after 22 years, were thinking of calling it quits. The family dog died. My child came out as transgender. It was just too much. I mean, God sometimes has to work extra hard on us when we don't get the hint, when it's smaller. And then all of a sudden, boom, oftentimes that's how things do happen is, you know, you hear about the power of threes. I'm not the superstitious type, but, you know, sometimes it takes back-to-back adverse events to finally cause us to quit. But so courage can be really subtle, and it can just be one tiny change, and it kind of just continues to move us forward, but at a more methodical pace and a more mindful pace than us trying to force forward motion. So it takes a lot of courage to stop running, because what I find is that there are these emotions that sometimes lurk in that void. First off, it can make us feel very vulnerable. It's almost like being in there naked, like we are stripped from our identities, and from, regardless of how powerful we are in our life, regardless of the job that you have, you can be the CEO of a company, but if you haven't processed some of these emotions that maybe have followed you, you know, maybe they're insecurities that have followed you for many years, you've been covering up until suddenly one day, if you don't intentionally keep working on processing them over time, these adverse events hit. And just like Trish just said, it's like mourning. You've got to give yourself time to do that. But it may make you feel vulnerable. It may make you feel weak, because being strong means that you're in action. It might mean you're physically strong. It might mean that you know answers to problems, and you know you're seen as an expert. You know what to expect. But now, in the stillness, you might confront that feeling of weakness. Now, it may just be a perception. So these emotions may be very real, but they may just be imaginary, but they're still enough for you to believe they're true. And so they're having an effect. Physically, just like Barb, you mentioned you couldn't sleep. That's how those unprocessed emotions can play out, is that you suffer mental health issues, you can't sleep.
I was going to also, there's been research about unprocessed stress affecting blood pressure, cholesterol levels, inflammation in the body in general, which leads to coronary artery disease, arthritis. So I think your presentation today, you're calling us to be brave, is also to confront some of these illnesses that we have some control over if we better care for ourselves.
Well, let me give you yet another example, because another one of those big setbacks that came, and this was more than 3, it was at least 5, was a marriage that had been floundering for many years. And although we had made attempts to find solutions to our chronic conflict, and it seemed like miscommunication, misunderstanding, and just a lack of joy in our marriage, it wasn't really enough to restore us to a joyful, stable marriage. And it wasn't until my father died, I had cancer, and I was like, okay, I'm just throwing in the towel here. I can't deal with this anymore. So it shows up in your relationships. And if you avoid confronting those little issues and just go, okay, well, tomorrow will be better, I'll just keep pushing ahead. But if you don't stop to be still, right? Trisha's nodding her head. The thing is, there's fear. There's fear in that void, because you might discover something huge, as if maybe we're not meant to stay married. Maybe these problems that we've been sweeping under the rug, thinking we can get by, maybe they are so huge that they have to be addressed. And you kind of don't want to, because maybe you're afraid it's going to disrupt the family. I'm not saying that always means divorce. And for us, it didn't. We fortunately were able to turn our marriage around. And that's a whole nother conversation I love to have about how I found we turned around our marriage from being on the brink of divorce to becoming best friends. And we had really never been friends for much of our marriage. So I want there to be hope that not all unstable relationships have to end that way. Trish's, yeah. But
Going, it didn't happen for me, but
yeah, well, it doesn't, and all the circumstances are different. I had been divorced before, so I had already experienced divorce. And in this case, our kids were still young, but there's never a guarantee where that'll go. But we did choose to end our marriage, and our plan was to do that. And that happened right before my cancer diagnosis. So good Lord, turned out great. But some other emotions we might confront are just confusion. If we sit there, we might discover we got a problem, we don't have the answer. Or maybe we're not all that. Maybe we're not even sure that we're following a path that's in alignment with our true values. Me, for example, when I got out of college, I joined the Army. I only joined the Army because I wanted a free ticket to Germany. My mom is German. She had taken us to Germany on a couple trips, and I fell in love. I so wanted to go to Germany. And out of high school, my mom was going to go back again, visit her parents. And I'm like, Mom, I want to come with you. And she said, no. Save your money. You're going to need it for other things. And so while she was in Germany, I found a classified ad in the paper that was looking for communication specialists in the Army. And I'm like, oh, I wonder if they can send me to Germany. So I signed up and I got to Germany. But 8 years later, when I got out of the Army, I'm like, that was never my path. But it wasn't until my first divorce, which was my first awakening, that I had to sit in the pause and go, that was not the path. I was confused about where was I supposed to go. So I never slowed down enough to really examine, am I following a path in alignment with my own true calling?
Jen, so what do you think it is that, I know you said that I was taking some notes, fear, being vulnerable, sense of being seen as weak, a confusion. So all those things prevent us from taking time to be still. What leads us? What gives us the permission to be still? Or what's the trick to move beyond those fears?
Very good, because I'm going to jump ahead here. And I'm going to jump right to an area here, which is some quotes from a blog I found as I was researching over time about, I guess, reinforcing my desire to be still, but validating the need for it. So as if I needed permission. And I wanted to share that with you because I think that that might answer some of that question. We look at some of the benefits of being still. We already talked about the physical benefits of being still because it allows your body to process unprocessed emotion, which if we don't, gets pent up. And like Trish had said, I mean, doesn't give us chance to work through them, even when they're serious, like there's a death and we need to mourn. And even like what you went through, Barb. Yeah, I have another story on that because I also had a brother who attempted suicide, and he's just been a mess since then. But our family never processed it together. Our family never sat and stopped and looked at this. We just tried to sweep that under the rug. That had a lifelong impact. But if I could read from you, I think that this so beautifully captures the desires of my heart when it comes to being more courageous, to being still. And it says this: I want the courage to be still, to not be afraid to exist in the spot I am instead of racing for where I think I should be or reaching for what I think I should have. I want the courage to shed the shoulds. I want the courage to not be in control, to not set the timetable, to not pick the direction, and to not trust myself before God or my higher power. I want the courage to hold space for someone who needs me in the stillness. I want the courage to be open, to be here in the present and to breathe it in. I want the courage to listen. I want the courage to accept that stillness is not the same as laziness, and that sometimes quality is not found in productivity.
Wow.
Isn't that powerful?
That kind of says it all.
Oh,
I just put in the chat that stillness is not the same as laziness. And I wonder how many of you grew up in homes where it was like, if you're taking time to be still, or if you're not being productive, you're seen as lazy. So I put that in the chat. Jen, I was going to ask you if you would share that passage with me, and I'll include it on the description when I post the video.
yeah, and I will get the reference for that blog too, because it deserves to be referenced for the woman who wrote that. But that is another one of those emotions which is very significant, is the belief that we're lazy in the stillness. And I was raised in a home where it was with 5 of us kids, there was a job to be done, and my parents were always in motion. They were working overtime, right? That was probably many of us. And that's why we are afraid to be still. I did think I was being lazy if I wasn't doing something.
So as I was listening to you read that, it called to mind a meditation that I did I took a meditation course, and there was this whole emphasis on the space between the inhale and before you exhaled. So that little space, you know, I don't even think that I had ever noticed that there was a space between inhale and exhale. And the idea was that if you can be still enough, you can see that, you can be aware of that space. And I don't know at the time that they were trying to get us to process any emotions, but as I was listening to you talk, I thought maybe it's time to revisit that meditation and in that space, think what it is that I need to process.
Yeah, because we're probably not likely to find an answer, but we're going to listen. So this concept of listening is really important in the topic of cultivating courage to be, which is to just exist, to be still, to be okay, unattached to any expectations of who we should be and what we should be doing. That is the bottom line. This is the whole story. And the environment that we are looking to cultivate courage in and why. But I feel as if when I don't make enough time to be still, I lose my grasp of the present moment because my mind is racing ahead. I'm looking at what I need to do, or I'm looking behind at what I should have done and I forgot to do. I got to hurry up and do that before the end of the day. But you know, the practice of mindfulness is all about coming into the present moment. And as we come to an end here, I want to just introduce some practices that we can use. We may know we need to do them, but I want to share how we can make them happen in our daily life. Because even in my busyness, I found a system that works now so that I make sure I include that time in and that it's not going to be postponed until another adverse event. And I realize that I did not make time to be still. And what I love is that doing these stillness practices regularly allows me to be more aware of my five senses. So I'm more attuned to the smells going on around me, and I savor them, and they help rewire my brain to be feeling more grateful every day. And so, Bernadette, as you know, we both went through that same course. I don't know if anyone else has, but the Science of Well-Being at Yale, we did that online together, and we learned how we can literally rewire our brain, but savoring and lingering, just think those words I love because the word linger just sort of lingers on my tongue. But I think about the process of lingering in that quiet, which is what, right? It's what mindfulness is.
Well, I have such a funny story about that course. My granddaughter came to visit us. We took this course during COVID. And I finally had my granddaughter come to visit, but they weren't coming in the house. So we were outside by our fire pit making s'mores. And I don't think they have s'mores at their house very often. And she had this chocolate marshmallow mess, and she's like shoving it in her mouth, just eating it as fast as she, and I had just taken this course. And I'm saying to her, you need to learn how to savor that, you know, to really, you'll taste it longer and you'll enjoy it more. And I'm trying to tell her. And so she goes back to her house, and my daughter-in-law calls and says, "What's this savoring stuff?" But you know, it's what I took away from that course.
Yeah.
It's really what you're teaching now, not just to savor food, but to savor life, right?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Even the yucky parts.
Even the yucky parts. And I don't know if it feels like it's so easy now to be convicted of the importance of slowing down when I realized I was diagnosed with this incurable cancer, and I have to live with that for the rest of my life, even though I'm going to reframe how I view it. It's definitely not going to define me, and it's not on my mind all the time, but it does remind me of my mortality. And we all need a little reminder once in a while of our mortality. It's hard. and it hurts for a while, but just like the Band-Aid, when you're ripping it off and it grabs all the hair on your arm, like, ow! Once it's done, then you can let the healing begin and then go, okay, well, I'm gonna just enjoy each day now as much as I can. The only resistance I run up to is that not everyone's going to be in that space.
Well,
So
yeah, I was just going to ask you, in the reminder of your mortality, does it coincide with a reminder to live fully? I mean, if we're all gonna die. I mean, it's part of life, right? But could that reminder of that, instead of being fear, instead of leading us to fear, leading us to this idea that since I'm not going to be here forever, I better better savor every little bit of life that I have.
yeah, well, that is like the definition of courage, right? It's experiencing fear, but walking through it. So it's like experiencing fear and saying, I'm still going to live my life. And how appropriate has that been over this past year, when we've been faced, all of us globally, with the threat of possible death. And we've had to make decisions about whether or not we're going to stop our life completely or figure out a way to still live life in the midst of this fear. And there could not be a better example to demonstrate the power of courage, because we're all called to keep living life despite our fears. And I think back on, since I was diagnosed, I made a solo trip to Greece just months after my last chemo because I wanted a victory lap. I said, oh my gosh, I gotta, my bucket list became real at that point. I was like, oh my God, I don't have as much time. I'm going to go back to my bucket list and where have I wanted to travel all this time? And I'm like, I'm going to Greece. No, going to go with me. That's okay. Don't know anybody. I don't care. I'm just going to do it and I'm going to see how that turns out. And I've got to tell you, I savor that experience for my entire life. And I'm so grateful that I just was able to make that decision and have the opportunity to do it. And so we're all faced with that. But again, if we don't make that time for stillness, which if I could go into that part, kind of summing this up and going, yeah, there's ways we can build that in and make it work for us. And it's different. It's different for everybody. There's no right or wrong way to practice stillness. But number one, if you are aware of meditation practices and you already use them, that's a great way to get still. Prayer is a great way to get still. But if I look around at my environment, especially during the winter months when we're more indoors, I'm going to look at, does my environment at home create a space for me to be still? And I'm big on encouraging everyone to carve out a space in their home as their sanctuary. So this is your space of stillness where you don't have the clutter. You can close the door and you can have quiet. And personally, in my old house that doesn't have a lot of doors to close off areas, I don't always have that space. So I prefer to go out in nature. What do you find, Trish? You too?
I'm laughing because my bedrooms and my bathrooms are the only places with doors in my house, and so I'm going, the bathroom is my still place. No, I live alone, so all of my house is still. But
well, it could be too that sometimes material stuff interferes with our ability, right? So finding a space that's decluttered. Well, so you have find your space where there is and it's gorgeous. You have a lot of mementos, but maybe there's a space. And if not, like in my house, I just like to be outside in nature because that's where I can actually, I'm sensitive to noise. I'm sensitive to visual clutter. So I literally have to get up and go outside into nature to truly detach and escape, or it won't happen. I have 3 cats too, so the cats are wee bit of a distraction in the house. But anyways, some stillness practices could include this also. You can direct your thoughts to peaceful statements. So it could be that as you're walking around during the day in your home, in between while you're taking breaks, there's an affirmation or peaceful statement that you intentionally bring into your life for that day, and you chant that throughout the day. So one might be, I am safe. This was one that I had to use a lot to work through anxiety at one point, because it was becoming overwhelming. And anxiety is a fear that you're not safe somewhere. So I would just repeat that statement, I am safe. Life is abundant, whatever that peaceful statement is. Another way is using visualizations, which I demonstrated last week or the week before. I love visualizations, but you can, if you can't get access to a still landscape, you can visualize it. And how powerful that we can manufacture anything in our head, even false stories about things that aren't true. But we can visualize a peaceful environment, and I've done guided meditations that guide you through a certain landscape and have you visualize you walking through a garden and describing exactly what the garden looks like. And right now, walking into this this greenhouse, it's filled with its overflowing plants and these beautiful hibiscus flowers, and you can do all of that, visualizing to create stillness. Going a little slower on your walks. That's hard for me because I feel like, well, I'm walking because I want to, burn some calories. And if I slow down, yeah, I want to move. So do I do 2 walks, or do I just choose each day if it's going to be a lingering walk, or it's going to be
it could be an intention. You could do intersperse them, because I do think that the intentional aspect of walking slowly. I went to a retreat one time, and it sounds weird, but they actually had us like pick up 1 foot on an inhale, set it down on an exhale. And so you were doing this but I'll tell you what, it made you, it did make me aware of my environment. It made me aware of me in the environment. Like,
oh, that's
I was
good.
aware of my muscles moving. I was aware of my breath. It was so focused on me, just trying to do this the right way. And, I'm one of those people, this is how you do it. Sign me up. I like to tell them. So when you were talking about that, slowing your walk down, that's what it made me think of.
Another one, I didn't include this on my list, but you just reminded me. It was a practice we used at a few women's retreats, and that is to have a communal meal in silence once in a while. And in the process of silence, you're more mindful of the food you're eating, and you're chewing. It's like you're chewing 10 times or 20 times a piece, but it's a mindfulness practice, right? Is really what it is. But
I've done another practice. It's and there was a couple years where I did this all the time. It was make everything you eat last 20 minutes. And part of that was it takes 20 minutes for your stomach to signal to your brain that you're satiated. But so the idea was, whether you're eating a meal, which is easy to make a meal last 20 minutes, but if you're stopping in the middle of the day to have a snack, sit down and eat it and make it last 20 minutes. And so, like, if you're going to have 2 or 3 cookies, it takes a long time. It's hard to make it last 20 minutes, but you wind up savoring it.
I remember that when I dig into my dark chocolate bar in the morning after my oatmeal, and I only want to do 3 squares. And if I'm mindlessly eating it, before you know it, I'm eating half of the bar of chocolate. So thank you. But if I let that just melt in my mouth, I'll bet that could, thank you.
Yeah.
A couple others, knitting, crocheting, doing some artwork. This is a wonderful way of creating stillness. I feel we overlook the value of expressing our creativity in some of these quiet arts. And it really wasn't until I connected with I'm not a knitter or a crocheter myself. I've done a little bit of that, but I do love painting and put on a little bit of music and paint. And I overlook the value of expressing myself artistically that way. But that is a wonderful way of creating stillness, because that gives you that space to process emotion or just bring things to mind that maybe you realize you need to investigate a little bit more. Reading, of course, reading is a great one.
Yeah.
Or
I was just going to say about being creative. Am I on mute?
No, we
Nope.
can hear you.
You hear me? Oh, okay. And I don't know, this might be like way off topic, but you know, you talked about doing things creative, and I have friends who, you know, they paint, they make applique, they sew clothing, they, you know, they produce art. And at one point I was kind of feeling like, man, I don't have any creative abilities. But what I decided was I like to cook and bake, and those are my creative abilities. So it was like, you know what, they can do that. That's what I have to do. And so that's when, you know, they're creating the visual arts, or that I'm creating edible arts. So
Listen, I got to
we're gonna
thinking
throw that out there.
myself, because although I love to paint and I would love to go back to playing guitar, I was investigating that myself, going, just the other day, I was doing one of the, it's the Wheel of Life, and it has about 8 segments in there, which all represent one element of life that in total demonstrate a fully balanced life. And I've used this in the past when someone comes to me to say that they're feeling a little meh about life. They think it's in this area, and we do some exploration and we find out there's really a gap of emptiness in some of those areas of life. And one of them is hobbies and recreation. And we find that it is an important element for almost all of us to have a way to express ourselves creatively. And that is where you look at, how am I expressing myself? I love doing graphic design. And in my business, I do a lot of graphic design, and that has taken the place of the old-fashioned, for lack of a better word, craft arts that maybe in another space and time I'll come back to. But yeah, we all should have a place to express ourselves creatively. And we may not realize maybe some things we're doing fulfill that, but if there's a gap, we definitely should look at filling that gap, because sometimes we may think the void we feel is maybe in our relationships. We redirect that emptiness to another segment of life and go, and so like sometimes women will come to me and go, my marriage is just not doing really great. I'm just not happy. And we look further and I'm like, well, how would you rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 10 in all these other areas of life? And we find there's some gaps. And like spirituality, sometimes there's a big gap there. And I go, well, maybe we should look at filling that gap first, and then look and see if you really feel your relationship is out of balance, or it's really that.
So I can really resonate with what Barb's saying about cooking as an expressive, creative art.
Oh yeah.
I really enjoy that. But it's interesting. I do that for myself, but I also crochet and sew as an expression. It's creative, but it's also an expression of connection with other people. Like for Christmas, I made all my grandchildren bathrobes. And just the other day, my son sent me a picture of his little 2-year-old in his penguin bathrobe. And, you know, I am almost finished my crochet blanket for my grandbaby that's going to be born soon. I don't know. It's not, I hope I get the blanket done first. But I received just recently, well, today I got an email, a picture of my other son and his wife, a sonogram. Their baby's 9 weeks old in utero. And my response back to that picture was, I better get crocheting the next blanket. And so I do find that some of the creative expressions are by me, for me, like the cooking, but some of the creative expressions are by me as an extension of me to other people. I don't know if that's the same thing or not, but it feels good to me.
Doesn't really matter. It's a vessel through which you can connect to yourself or to others, right?
Right.
And
Well, that's what I didn't know. Is it still, if you're doing it to connect to others, is it the same value?
yeah, I think that in the context of our conversation, I think I would look at it as sometimes we get so good at this. I see women that can literally be in line at the grocery store and process their groceries while they are actually crocheting. I don't know if that's the mindfulness space that I'm referring to when I say use it as your mindfulness space, right? Yeah. Then it becomes,
I have to go. So I just want to say goodbye.
Oh.
And, until next time, right?
Okay, Barb,
until
thank you
next
so
time,
much.
Barb. Yeah, we're bringing it to an end. Thanks, Barb. Thanks for your
You're welcome.
contribution.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Jen, I
Yeah.
wanted to introduce you to Trish because she joined us just a little late. She's joining us from Canada.
Oh, hi, Trish.
She's been to a couple of our events. And
Lovely. I love your shirt too. I got my green on, but not my St. Patty's Day.
To tell you the truth, like the US border is like 5 miles from me.
Wow.
So although I'm in Canada, you know, I'm in Abbotsford, which is just north of Washington State, you know.
well, it's always great to see you.
But I mean, I feel included. I mean, after all, we're North American, whatever.
Yeah.
Well, I think we're all a little Irish on the inside, maybe, right?
Yeah. But I can't come to all of these things. Unfortunately, I have something that takes place that ends at 12 o'clock. And by the time I get here, that was why I was late today. And
Not to worry.
Most of the time I go, oh, I'm late, I might as well not go. But today I saw the email again and went, oh, I have time to get in there. Let's see what happens. So yeah, I did miss the first part of, but.
What have you thought so far about this conversation, Trish?
Well, I feel as if I've processed a lot of this myself already. However, I'm 77. So when I was like 20 years younger, I would have loved to have been involved in something like this so that I could have done it sooner. It's when you get to be like older and by yourself and have the time, I can access all sorts of things to teach me all this stuff. And you know, I'm going, well, I wish I had known it when I was younger. I think I did process some things well, but not others. And I don't know.
But Trish, you make such a good point. Because prime time for women is really for women who finally have the time to make themselves the prime feature. Yeah. So
exactly.
Great.
Yeah. Well, sometimes though, this is that place where we finally start thinking about ourselves and we confront some of these emotions that we haven't, like even our identity. And I have been in a group, a support group for women, with women up into their 70s, and been so surprised to find that even at that age, some of them had never really confronted those dragons and had just gone on and moved on. And if it wasn't their children, then it was their grandchildren that kept them busy, gave them purpose. And it wasn't until they sat down with their stories in the quiet to examine what maybe had been lingering in the background for many years and they never talked about. And there were wounds there that still were not healed. And that's why I love doing this, because I realized it's never too late. And just like you, I wish I would have had some of this knowledge and tools when I was younger, but some of it is experience we have to go through. And some is wisdom that gets passed down and spares us unnecessary agony, helps us get through. But if I look at what could we do when we go back into life, and so this will be more just for posterity's sake for those that are watching the replay, but we really do need to look at making space to be still and listen. The really key concept here is listening. Listen to our intuition and our gut, because that is kind of our higher power. It will bring to the surface whatever's simmering around in there that maybe we don't quite know what to do with, but it will point us toward a direction of something we need to look at further. And then
I don't know if you can see the chat, but I wrote in there tips for stillness, meditation, prayer, create a quiet place in your home, spend time in nature, use affirmation or statements of peace, use
Perfect.
visualization or peaceful environments, slow your walk, have a communal meal in silence, express creativity through quiet art such as painting, drawing, knitting, cooking, and crocheting. So
Perfect.
I love all those things that you shared, and I think they're something that all of us can find, we can all implement them in some aspect of our life.
Yep. And then I think that's just to kind of sum it up is also looking at that space of stillness as an opportunity to be held, to just be held metaphorically, maybe literally, to be held in that quiet space as if you don't know what will happen in the next moments, but just feel that love and that peace that escapes us when we're always in busy mode, and just know we're okay just as we are, detached from any other identity or expectation.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. Trish, did you have something you wanted to say? Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I still have to talk myself down from feeling selfish about doing this kind of thing. And, I know it's not now, but there's still that, because of all the talk in in previous times, like when you were talking about, as a child, as a teenager, I remember sitting, relaxing in a chair, kind of going somewhere, and my mother would come along and say, get up and do something.
Yeah.
And so,
Generational thing.
It is that's one of the things about being in our prime. We've had time to live long enough to maybe look back and say, that's how we did it then, but it no longer serves us. And we have the choice and the power to do it differently now. And I love that you're taking care of yourself, that you're making space for yourself. You're a woman in your prime.
Yeah, but look at not to linger in this, but really to put this into context, because we brought up this example of when we were younger, what the environment was like and how we might feel that we'd be lazy if we were sitting still. We lived in a less busy world back then. And so being busy and having things to do was a part of our daily life. Whereas today, technology and the pace of life has increased so much that we have to fight that inherent urge to keep going and intentionally unplug and be still, like we didn't have to before. So now it's a whole change of.
I love that you use the word intentionally unplug. Yeah, that's like unplugging for a purpose, not just unplugging.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Jen, and we'll see you next week. Now, can you give us a little tip about what we're going to be discussing next week?
That's right. Let's look at next week. What is on our agenda? Next week is, so this week was cultivating courage to be. Now next week will be cultivating courage to act.
Okay.
And so in this, we will look at things like speaking up, advocating for justice, and making decisions, and all of the fears that are involved along the way. So
Well, we'll look forward to it, Jen. We know you always have lots of wisdom to share with us. So thanks for being here. Trish, thanks for joining, and we'll see you next week.